Hi, everyone. We're gonna get started in a few minutes and we'll turn it over to Excel in a few minutes to set up interpretation.
Buenas tardes, vamos a comenzar en unos minutos y le vamos a pasar después el micrófono a Excel para que explique cómo tener acceso a servicios de interpretación.
Boa noite a todos. Estamos começando em alguns minutos, uns 2 minutos, e vamos então explicar como acessar o serviço de interpretação.
Just realized I was muted. Hi, everyone. I'm gonna turn it over to Julian to help us get interpretation set up.
Sure. Thank you, Marisa, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to this budget breakdown meeting. And tonight we have interpretation available in Spanish and also in Portuguese. So I'm gonna share my screen just for a few seconds. And in just a moment, you will see this globe icon next to the word interpretation. You will find this at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There you will see the option to select your language. If you have joined from a cell phone or tablet, look for the three dots button on your screen next to the word more. From there, you will see interpretation as an option in the list to choose your language. An important reminder, everyone has to select a language and stay in that channel. Now, I will turn it over to Jimena to repeat that in Spanish.
Buenas noches, esta tarde tenemos servicios de interpretación en español y portugués. Cuando estos comiencen, usted verá que aparecerá el icono de un globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Si usted le da clic, podrá escoger el idioma de su preferencia. Si usted se está conectando a través de un celular o de una tableta, tiene que buscar los tres puntitos junto a la palabra más o more, seleccionar Language Interpretation, le da clic y aparecerá una lista y de ahí podrá seleccionar su idioma. Como recordatorio, independientemente del idioma que usted hable, por favor, seleccione uno y permanezca en ese canal. Gracias.
Thanks, Jimena. Camila, can you please repeat that in Portuguese?
Boa noite. Em alguns momentos nós vamos começar então nosso serviço de interpretação e vocês vão ver na sua tela, na parte inferior, o ícone de um globo, se você estiver acompanhando através de um computador, onde você pode fazer a sua escolha de preferência, entre inglês e espanhol. Se você estiver acompanhando através de um celular ou de um tablet, você vai ver a palavra mais ou more na parte inferior da tela também, com três pontinhos, onde você pode também clicar e fazer a sua escolha de língua de preferência. É importante lembrar que você precisa fazer uma escolha de um canal de língua, mesmo que seja em inglês, e permanecer nesse canal para que você possa ter acesso à interpretação. Obrigada.
Thanks, Camila. Okay, and interpretation should be available now. Back to you, Marisa.
Thanks, Julian, and thanks, Excel. All right, welcome everyone to our first budget breakdown. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names and faces and some new ones, which is really, really great. So We are hoping to chat with you all about the fiscal year 2027 state budget tonight and really help you prepare for the upcoming budget season. So we're going to start with some introductions. We'll talk a little bit about the current budget year and sort of what the last fiscal year's budget means to you now, what you're seeing, what you're feeling in early education and care programs. We'll talk about how to prepare for fiscal year 2027, and then we have some next steps. What I'd like to do to get us started is just some introductions. So in a minute, I'll ask the strategies team and the neighborhood villages teams to introduce themselves. And while we're all doing that, I'd love for you all to add in the chat your name, where you're zooming in from in Massachusetts, and then the number that best corresponds to you from this list. So this is the Elevating Voices Continuum. We've used it on our meetings for the past couple of years. It's a way to get a sense of sort of who's in the room. So number one, if you are the caregiver of a young child under the age of 8, or if you interact with children and families every day in your professional role. Number two, if you interact with children and families occasionally in your professional role. Or number three, if you do not regularly interact with children and families, but you do have a vested interest. So go ahead and add that all to the chat, and then we can kick off the introductions from SFC and Neighborhood Villages. So hi, I'm Marissa Fear. I'm the Director of Policy at Strategies for Children, and I will pass it over to Shakira.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shakira Parker. I'm the Early Childhood Policy Pathways Fellow at Strategies.
And then why don't we go over to Neighborhood Villages?
I'll go. I'm Latoya Gale. I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy and Family Partnerships at Neighborhood Villages. Emmanuel, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm Emmanuel Verdu. I am a policy analyst at Neighborhood Villages.
And then Liz, do you want to do a quick intro too, or pass it along?
I was not planning to, but I am Elizabeth
Sorry.
Dillon. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy and Research at Neighborhood Villages and a budget nerd. I'm excited to be here with all of you.
Thanks, Liz. Liz is in listening mode. I called on her. All right, awesome. So I'm starting to see some pop up in the chat. We have lots of ones, twos, and threes here tonight, which is exactly what we're hoping to see in these meetings. A wide range of perspectives. And we also have a lot of people from all across Massachusetts, which is really great. So keep populating that in the chat. We can continue to look at that throughout the meeting. What we wanted to start with is some questions that we've had from you all. So, I mean, these are questions that we get, throughout the year, just related to the budget process, as well as you might have seen during our registration, we asked if you had any questions specific to the budget process and this meeting. So some of the common questions that we've gotten in the past is, when should I contact my legislators? How do I contact my legislators? What do I talk with them about once I am talking with them? Will the fiscal year 2027 state budget have sufficient funding to issue new income eligible vouchers? That was one question we saw in a number of the responses on the registration report. So we're definitely going to be talking about that a little bit tonight. We also saw a lot of concern, uncertainty around how federal funding cuts might impact the Massachusetts state budget this year and EEC funding in particular. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. There were some questions about sort of where does funding for early education and care come from? So what are the revenue streams that fund early ed in Massachusetts? When you think about, priorities, like where do we see trade-offs in state budgeting where funding maybe comes from another section? And then there was a question about sustainability, which we thought was really interesting too. So how do we make sure that, increases that we are getting in early education and care funding over the years is sustainable, that it's something that we can continue on and move forward with. We also had a couple questions about C3 that were in the registration report, which we thought was very interesting again, and we want to talk about more tonight. So we'll get into all of that later on tonight, but I'm curious for you all, it'd be helpful for us as well if you have any other questions that maybe you didn't see reflected here or that you're really hoping we cover at some point throughout the hour. Go ahead and add them to the chat and we can, we'll pause the slides and we'll make sure we address them throughout the presentation as well too. If this is your first budget breakdown or your, I think, third now, where we've gone through this process, we really want these to be interactive, I guess is my main point. So, we have some slides to help give you some visuals. We know everyone learns differently. People like to have materials to look at while they're responding to questions, but we really want this to be a conversation. We want to hear from you all about what you're thinking, what questions you have. So please do not hesitate to raise your hand and ask a question or write something in the chat that we can address in the middle of the meeting. All right, I will turn it over to Latoya.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to get us started by just talking about the context of the budget in general. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, thank you. So let's talk about what a state budget does. In general, there's a saying that a budget is a statement of values. And so when we look at our state budget, it can show us what is important to our lawmakers. And it also shows how Mass will spend the money that it has, and if there are any rules or perimeters for how that money is spent. I don't know if anybody has any questions about that. Wanted to just give you framing for what a budget can do. Also, the question we get a lot is, well, where does the money come from? In our sector, 84% of the funding in our sector is state funds. 16% is federal funds. That's not the whole budget for Massachusetts, but we're talking about early ed and care. And a question we also get is, well, like with all the things going on in Washington, how does that impact our federal funds? I mean, our funding for our sector. So even though 84% of the funds in our sector are state funds, in the event that we did lose funding federally, and it could not even be directly for our sector, it may force our legislature to have to make hard choices. And that's why we do these calls, to keep you guys informed and to show you how to advocate if that happens or if it doesn't happen. Okay. I think Emmanuel is up next. We're going to talk about Shakira, right? The process.
It's me. Hi, everyone. So now we're just going to talk a little about the timeline. So as you can see, the fiscal year starts on July 1st, 2026 and ends on June 30th, 2027. But the process of putting the budget together starts way before that. And so, as some of you are probably familiar, like the state government is funded annually. And so there are different factors that go into the budget. So, such as elected official priorities, what they hear from constituents and advocates such as you all attending tonight, as well as the revenue, like what Latoya was just mentioning, like the federal and state. And actually, the revenue hearing was held today by the Joint Committee on Ways and Means. So it gives an estimate of how much money the state will have for the upcoming fiscal year, which is used to inform budget priorities. So I believe you can watch the recording of what happened today if you didn't see it. And so the governor releases her budget in January. And that's why it's important that she hears from you all from now on what you all want to see included in the budget and why it matters to you. And then there are several other opportunities for you to reach out and advocate. So when the House releases their budget in April, and then again, when the Senate releases theirs in May. And this is where it's helpful to know who your representatives are so that you can reach out to them regarding your priorities. And then strategies also has a state budget page that includes what was in the FY25 and 26 budgets. And we track what's in each of the governor, House, and Senate's budget as they come out. So you can find these resources in our Advocacy HQ webpage, which after this is over, there will be resources shared with you all. And then finally, the House and Senate vote on the final budget in June and send it to the governor. And then the final budget is available in July. So that's just a quick overview. I don't know if there's any questions there.
Thanks, Shakira. There is one question in the chat, which I think is a really important one. So Ren asked, what is Ways and Means? So the Massachusetts state legislature is composed of two different branches. There's the Senate and there's the House of Representatives. Both of those branches sort of organize themselves into various committees based on topic areas. So you'll have an education committee or a health committee, and then you have the Ways and Means Committee. So the Ways and Means Committee is responsible for setting the state budget and developing initial priorities. It sort of is like the fiscal manager of the legislature. So in terms of this process, they hold a lot of power and a lot of responsibility. So what Shakira was referencing was the Joint Committee of Ways and Means. So members from both the Senate and the House held a hearing earlier today to talk about what revenue looks like in Massachusetts, and then they'll use those numbers to develop their priorities and their budget proposals. Great question, Lauren. All right, Shakira, back to you.
I also just added in the chat the link to the revenue if anyone's interested in watching it. I haven't watched it yet. But and so this is where you identify your budget priorities. So given the timeline, you want to be able to know like you can use the previous year's budget or EC's budget priorities to help you get started and thinking about what areas you might want to advocate for, like what it is that you want to see, whether or not that's increased funding for childcare financial assistance, increased funding for common cares for children, which is also known as C3, and additional compensation and benefits for educators. So you really want to start thinking about what's important to you and how you can share your story with the governor, your representatives, EEC. You can go to the next slide, Marissa. Thank you. And so this just gives you a high-level overview of how EEC is thinking about their budget priorities. And so maybe your priorities align with some of these items.
The women coaches are just too soft. Like it's too,
Can you not hear me? Oh, no. Okay.
Go ahead, Shakira, you're good.
So yeah, I was just saying that this gives you an idea of what EEC's budget priorities are, and you can use these as a starting point to start thinking about what your priorities are and where you may align or maybe choose a few of these that you might want to advocate for, and think about how the previous year's budget or has like impacted you and how you might want to shape your story and what you share in terms of advocating for the FY27 budget. And then next slide. And so, as mentioned earlier, it's important to start building relationships with your representatives and other elected officials. So if you haven't contacted them before, you can start now by contacting them about what your FY27 budget priorities are. We're happy to help support you. We have templates that we can share. And so if you don't already know your representative, the link in this slide can be used to help find them.
All right, let's pause there for a minute and just see if there's any questions about what Latoya and Shakira have shared so far, or if anyone wants to share a little bit about what your priorities are. So have you started to think about that? Is there one thing that you feel really strongly about going into the next fiscal year that you want to see get an increase or be prioritized? See if there's any questions or comments.
Maybe we should go back to the previous slide so people can see some of the different areas.
Alessia put more support for infant toddler certifications. We need more infant toddler teachers. A great one, Alessia. Increasing early educator salaries. Amazing. Higher pay for family, friend, and neighbor providers. Expanding the Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative to new communities. More benefits for family childcare. These are all really great. Yeah. So For some of these, there's really concrete line items that are associated with it. Like as an example, there is a Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative line item for CPPI. And for other of these priorities, you really have to sort of think about, where does the funding flow that allows you to do some of these things? So if you wanted to increase educator salaries, what funding streams would allow you to make those kinds of investments? Same thing for benefits as an example. Special needs programming. Yeah, this is great. Keep this list coming. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Emmanuel, who's going to give us a little bit of context around FY27 and talk us through what to prepare for.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Marissa. All right. So, like Marissa said, I'm going to talk to you guys a bit about what happened in fiscal year 2026 so you can have context for fiscal year 2027. So, in fiscal year 2026 state budget, Massachusetts patched that budget on July 4th, 2025, and it will be in effect until June 30th, 2026. So that's going back to what Shakira was talking about how we run on the fiscal year, not like the calendar year for the budget. And so in fiscal year 2026 state budget, we sustained funding levels, and there was additional funding for the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. Also, there was funding allocated for different policy reforms that passed in the fiscal year 2025 budget. Next slide, please. All right, so most funding stayed level, but there was an increase in child care financial assistance. Like I said, the budget funds programs through multiple sources and sometimes within other line items. And so we just pulled out some of the line items and we broke them up by the different categories that we're focusing on at neighborhood villages and the categories that we're paying most attention to. So that's operational funding. So C3, Commonwealth Cares for Children, that's family affordability. So that's child care financial assistance. And then educator compensation and benefits, which is made up of a couple different things. One thing I'll say about CCFA is that, as you can see from fiscal year budget 2025 to fiscal year budget 2026, it did increase significantly by about like $200 million. But then also you have to take into consideration that the legislature passed a supplemental budget that was about almost $200 million. So from fiscal year 2025 to fiscal year 2026, it's about the same. Next slide. These are just additional line items in case you want to take a look at them related to EEC's administration and early childhood mental health supports. Next slide, please. All right. So over the years, EEC's funding has increased, which is great. As you can see from fiscal year 2022, funding was at about $800 million, and in fiscal year 2026, it increased to about $1.7 billion. So that's about a $1 billion increase, which is wonderful for the sector. This increased funding shows that the legislature recognizes the importance of the sector and is committed to supporting it. I will note that what's not highlighted in this chart is the pandemic funding that we received from the federal government during the pandemic. That was over $700 million, and it was to bolster the childcare industry. It was also used to create C3. That money has since expired, and so now C3 is completely funded by the state. It is completely state funded. Also, I'll note that I previously talked about a supplemental budget that had passed this year for almost $200 million. There was also a fiscal fair share supplemental budget that also passed this year, and that was for $45.5 million. And that was because the fair share surtax, or the millionaire tax, accumulated more money than was anticipated. And so they allocated additional funding to the sector. All right, so getting into the federal context, there is a lot going on federally that can impact Massachusetts or will impact Massachusetts. The federal government is going through their own budget process, just like Massachusetts has to go through the budget process and figure out what their budget is going to look like. The federal government does the same thing. And so what happens federally will affect Massachusetts, and it has affected Massachusetts already. So for fiscal year 2026, the total budget was about $61 billion, and Massachusetts is expecting almost $16 billion from the federal government. So that is a lot of money. And then in addition to the budget process, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed earlier this year, and it has serious implications for Massachusetts' budget, children and families in Massachusetts, and also educators and the services that they all rely on. It has changes to SNAP and Medicaid or Mass Health, like reduced funding and limiting of services for immigrants. Also, during the federal shutdown, we saw disruptions to Head Start and SNAP as well. So as we look at the Massachusetts budget, it's important to think about what's happening federally as well. Although the revenue picture, we've heard that the revenue picture for Massachusetts seems stable, federal unknowns and federal cuts are going to impact how the government thinks about revenue and thinks about the budget. Next slide, please. Yeah, so although, SNAP, Medicaid, or Mass Health, and any other additional areas aren't directly related to early education in Massachusetts, depending on what happens federally, it could impact funding for early education. Next slide, please. So we won a lot of things in fiscal year 2025, a lot of initiatives that advocates like you have been fighting for years. And so we're really excited about that, but we're still fighting for different initiatives, programs, support in Massachusetts for early education. And so we're fighting for family affordability, so increased funding for CCFA. We're fighting for operational funding to meet the true cost of care, so increased C3 funding, increased CCFA reimbursement rates, and also educator compensation and benefits, so increased compensation and benefits and career advancement.
Emmanuel, one of the questions we got before the meeting today was how certain can someone be that C3 will continue or that it will be sustainable moving forward? Can you speak to that a little bit with the wins that we got?
For sure. So in the fiscal year 2025 budget, C3 became permanent. So that is law. C3 is permanent. What is important to fight for as we, go through the budget process is funding for C3. So really talking about the needs and what and explaining why we need additional funding for C3 is really important. C3 has been funded for the last 3 years at $465 million. And so there are more people participating in the program, but the pie is the same. And so people are gonna get less because we don't have more to provide for them.
Thank you. All right, next slide, right? Yeah. All right, I think Latoya, over to you for this part.
Yes, and you guys are being really quiet tonight too, so I want to remind you, if questions are coming up, throw them in the chat or ask to come off mute. We are here to answer questions. But I'm gonna talk about the reality of what all this stuff means. And so when we talk about the legislative reforms that we won, the reality is there was another question in the registration too about CCFA. And so, we did win increased eligibility, income eligibility for childcare financial assistance, but the reality is we don't have money for it. That's basically an unfunded mandate. So while it's there, the law is in place, we need to still be fighting for the funding so that we can realize that win. The same for free community college. Career pathway support is still needed to supplement free community college, so early educators have different opportunities to pursue that fit their needs, to pursue their education. And the same thing with the higher education scholarships and loans. The EEC is accepting applications right now for the scholarship program. The loan forgiveness program is not yet operating, but it is funded. So there's funding has been allocated to it. Okay, I hear a question. Would you mind explaining which part, Ren? You can just come off mute if you want to ask.
Oh, I was asking Anna what Anna meant by education for benefits to retirement plan.
Oh, I was Anna's. What's Anna, do you want to come off mute and tell us?
Thank you.
I don't know if she wants to come off mute. But Anna, were you talking about that you think educators need benefits in a retirement plan? Not sure.
I wasn't sure if it was like a like if yeah, I didn't understand.
Yeah. I'm gonna assume, unless Anna comes off a mute, that maybe she was saying that's something that educators need, that maybe that was something that we should be fighting for and looking for funding for. Um, it's something that we hear a lot, like, when we think about K through 12 teachers, they have benefits, they have a pension that they pay into. What would it look like for us to have that for the folks who are doing the work in early ed? Right. Okay, Alicia?
Sorry, I'm looking in the screen
It's
all over the
okay. It's
place.
okay.
Sorry. So it's not so much a question, but a comment, right? So I
Okay.
see the next one coming down. You're talking about removing the cap of 10 children. And I see
Mm-hmm.
the reality of this, but there's so many other issues with this particular idea. One of
Okay.
them being that, family childcare providers can get burned out very easily because
Mm-hmm.
you're working 24/7 in your own home. Trust me, I work remotely. Do not love it. So I
Mm-hmm.
can't imagine doing that with kids running around all day. But
Mm-hmm.
if an emergency arises, your own child gets sick and you need to take them, there's just nothing set in place. I had a brainchild yesterday, so I want to share it with the group. There's
Okay.
nothing set in place to help people. There are centers that, when you're out of ratio, there's nothing set in place to help those people. If you work in a public school, we have like a building based sub, or you have a substitute line where you call the person and say, hey, can you come and, substitute today? Why can't we have that for EEC where people get sent out to family childcare or to
Mm.
centers and there's like a hotline that you call? But we have to pay these people. So then the money, there's a money issue, but that is missing in EEC. We don't have your, like emergency sub that comes in
Mm-hmm.
case of an emergency. And we need to think about that. Marissa, I think my strategies for I'm on a different wavelength. So I don't know if
No, it's a
I
really good
love it.
point. Yeah.
I
And
mean, we
it's
don't have
interesting,
it.
Alessia, a lot of states do have that, which is interesting. So like there are
Oh,
models
good
we
to
can
know.
look at other
Yeah.
states where they have created some sort of a substitute pool. I think it's a
Right.
really important point. And I just wanted to clarify quickly. So what's on the left-hand side here, these are things that have already passed into state law. So the legislature in the fiscal year 2025 state budget, they removed what already existed where there was a cap that limited family childcare to 10 children. A lot of family childcare programs had been advocating for an increase to say 12. The barrier to that is that there was this cap written into state law. So the legislature took that cap out. So now that barrier no longer exists. And what happens next kind of lies in EEC. So we'll see what the Department of Early Education and Care does. I know they are reviewing and revising the licensing regulations, so we'll see exactly what that turns into. But the reforms didn't increase the capacity limit to 12. It just removed that barrier, if that helps
Exactly,
make some
exactly. And
sense.
now it's a regulatory thing. Now EEC has the freedom to say we can create regulations for people to have up to 12 kids instead of 10 kids. But that would still be a choice that a provider can make, how many kids they want to have. But I also want to say this for to you, Alicia, that we need to have like these crazy and big bold ideas, right? Oh, I'm not even going to call them ideas that we think are crazy. They're like, oh, I
Right.
don't know if we could do it. We need to do it. Something I always say on these calls is all policy starts with an idea. Like somebody said,
Exactly.
there's a problem. What are some creative ways that we can solve it? So keep doing that. Like keep
Yes.
doing that. Keep making those suggestions. Keep throwing them out there. So yeah.
And I have a question too,
Mhm.
with the 10 children. So now that we've increased the cap to 12, let's say, those people are still going to require an assistant. That's why I'm thinking, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like 12. You still
Yeah.
need an assistant.
You still,
Okay.
yeah,
Exactly. So,
right.
and to
That's why.
clarify, they haven't increased it to 12 yet. So right now the capacity limit
It's
is still
It's
10.
still 10.
They just have the option to increase it to 12 if they want. I think the way that I've heard family childcare describe it is that because the ratio is 1 to 6, they'd like to see it be 2 to 12. So that
okay.
you're maintaining that sort
Mhm.
of
The
1 to 6
balance.
person thing and
Yeah,
increasing it slightly. But we'll see.
right. Right. And I'll also say some other things about like this real talk. Emmanuel mentioned it. C3 is permanent, guy. It's permanent. It's written into law. It's not going anywhere. The thing that's our responsibility every year is to make sure it's funded, right? So every year when budget season comes around, that's a thing. It's a funded thing. It's a in law, and our fight is every year how much money is in that line to fund this necessary program that we've all come to rely on. And so that's something that we're going to do every year. And over this budget season, we'll start to talk about what we're advocating for that line, like collectively as a sector, all of us together. And the same thing, setting reimbursement rates and other funding levels based on the true cost of care. Like in reality, I think, we still hear from providers like that reimbursement rate needs to be higher. That's what we hear. But EEC has finished one phase of a two-phase project to update our cost model in the state. There have been significant increases to reimbursement rates, but they still just don't cover the cost of care for a provider. That's the reality. And next slide. I don't know what's on the next slide. Uh-oh.
I think this one's over for Shakira, but
Okay.
maybe before we jump into this next
Yeah,
part,
yeah.
are there any other questions about what we shared on these two slides here? So some of
Yeah.
what we're seeing today in terms of budgeting, and I'm thinking back to what you all put in the chat earlier about your priorities, and I saw a lot of
Yeah.
things around educator pay and benefits. And when I look at the first two rows here and I see C3 and I see reimbursement rates, like getting those funding amounts up, that's how you get to higher
Mm-hmm.
educator pay and increased benefits.
Right.
So just wanted to make that connection too. But any questions on any of these things before we move on? We should have some time for questions at the end too,
Yeah,
if there
yeah.
isn't any now. All right, Shakira, over to you.
Thank you. And so, like the slide said, this budget is only one part of the process. After policies are passed, such as the legislative reforms Latoya just talked about, then we need to focus on what's needed to make these policies a reality, as well as ensure these policies are working as intended for the people directly impacted, such as families and providers which is where implementation advocacy and hearing from you all comes in. And even some of the priorities you all shared in the chat have opportunities for implementation advocacy, such as thinking about like the early educator salaries. So whether that's through advocating for more C3 dollars that Emmanuel and Latoya just talked about, or in the future, if there's public comments for the next iteration of the C3 formula, that could be a potential opportunity, or thinking about the career ladder and salary scale. That's not available yet, but EEC is working on it. So monitoring or see when there will be opportunities for engagement there. So just ways to think about implementation advocacy. And then EEC's board meetings, Neighborhood Village's monthly board meeting summary, and Commissioner Kershaw's monthly overview on the 9:30 call are just some of the ways you can stay up to date with what is happening with different areas of interest, which can help to inform both, your budget priorities and implementation advocacy. You can also send questions to us for the commissioner on the 9:30 call. You can go to the next slide. And then, like I mentioned, EEC in the board meeting slides includes a list of topics that they focus on for FY26. So it gives an idea of what EEC is currently working on, but also provides opportunities for engagement, such as sharing feedback with EEC or giving input at a board meeting. I know at the beginning of the board meetings or sometime in the board meetings, there's opportunities for people to speak. And then you can also sign up for their newsletter so you can see the agenda for the board meetings ahead of time and decide if that's something you might want to watch or attend, and also speak during it. And so some of the topics, that might be of interest, like what we were just talking about, the FY26 CCFA rate increase, even like Family Advisory Council or the Family Friend and Neighbor Care. I saw someone put in the chat around wanting increased funds for Family Friend and Neighbor Care, or increases for infrastructure, not information around infrastructure. So I think there's different areas that, EEC provides that you all can get involved in. And then are there any questions? I forgot about this slide. So we kind of already talked about all of these different pieces, just thinking about the implementation advocacy, how you move from policy reform to reality, where there are opportunities to do implementation advocacy and monitor what's like happening and how you all can have input, and just like understanding the budget process. Like we mentioned, the timeline and establishing strong relationships, reaching out to the governor, reaching out to your representatives from the House, reaching out to the senator, and then preparing for the FY27 state budget. Now, are there any questions?
All right. So, next steps. What happens next? I know we just we threw a lot at you in 45 minutes there. So we have 15 minutes to hear from you all about where you want to take this now. All right, so I see some things are popping up in the chat here, which is perfect. So when reaching out to legislators, do we just email them? Is there a format to follow? That is such a great question. I'll talk about that in a second. If there could be a way to have a group of experienced educators or providers who, okay, so this is more in the substitute area, would help support that. And Shakira shares that we have templates to share. Perfect. Okay, so as Shakira shared earlier, the first step in this process is the governor's proposal. So we are expecting that the governor's budget proposal will come out in late January, which means that right now is the best time to reach out to the governor and let her know what your budget priorities are. We can repeat that process with the House and with the Senate in the next few months. We also shared that the revenue consensus hearing was today. The next step in the legislature is that they will hold joint Ways and Means Committee public hearings by topic area. So they'll have an education focused hearing of the Joint Ways and Means Committee. They'll invite a panel from higher education, a panel from K to 12, and a panel from early education and care to speak at that hearing and to talk about budget priorities. That should happen in early winter. And then finally, stay connected. So we have the Strategies for Children 9:30 call sign up form linked here. Neighborhood Villages has a policy pulse. And then Latoya, do you want to share a little bit about Budget Bootcamp and what you're hoping to do with that this year?
Absolutely. And Alicia, I see the best way to contact the governor is by email, and we can send you a link to email her and her team. Yeah, and also starting in the first week in February, we're going to be doing budget boot camp here at Neighborhood Villages. It's something that we started last year. So we're going to dig in deeper than we can do like on these calls. It's a cohort experience. So if you sign up, hopefully the same folks keep showing up. We're going to go over all these things like the timeline for the budgets, how do things work, but we're going to be able to dive a little deeper into that and also hear from you guys what your priorities are, and then where do those priorities live in the budget. And what we do, which is really fun, is we wrap up with actually going to the State House. So this group will you'll make appointments with your legislator. We'll go in together, all together. We'll have meetings with your legislator and advocate for your budget priorities. Liz put it in there. There you go. And there's a link in the chat right now. We'll send it out too with the follow-up that you can register for Budget Bootcamp. It's going to be a fun time. And it's going to work in conjunction with these budget breakdowns that we do here too. But it's just a great way if you want to really dig a little deeper into your advocacy and learn, and then put that learning into action. And I'm also going to put in the chat, Neighborhood Villages, we have a budget page up this year. So you can go there and you can see like any events we're having, like whether it's this one, like another budget breakdown that we'll have a follow-up after the governor's budget, or if it's budget boot camp, or thinking to sign up for our policy polls. Emmanuel does a great breakdown every month of the EEC board meeting. So if you want to know what's going on there too, but come to budget boot camp. It'll be a fun time.
Amazing. Okay, so we can share the link in the chat right now for how to contact the governor. If you want help sort of figuring out how to translate your priorities into a line item ask, or like where does your priorities show up in the state budget, please, please, please email us and just let us know. We are so happy to help you come up with like the language or figure out how you want to frame something. So that's one kind of next step that you can take immediately, is contacting the governor and sharing what's important to you. We also want you to start to get connected to the legislature. So I'm going to circle back to Roswana's question about, when reaching out to legislators, do you just email them? Is there a format to follow? We're going to talk a little bit about that right now. So I'm going to quickly slide through these slides just to get back to this one. So the very first step is just understanding who represents you. You can click on the link that's on the slide here, and it will have you fill out a form based on your address that tells you who your state representative is and who your state senator is. That's the very first step. Once you know who those two people are, you can look them up on Google. You can see sort of where they might live in your district or nearby, what their faces look like so that you can recognize them when you eventually see them around town or at the state house. And then it'll have contact information. So it'll have their email address listed there where you can send them a quick note. What we always recommend is that you want to start that relationship not with an ask, but by developing a relationship with them. So send them a quick note, introduce yourself, let them know that you work in early education and care in some capacity, or whatever your professional role is, why this issue is important to you, and share that you'd love to be a resource for them if they have any questions, or if they ever want to learn more about this issue. That's sort of the first kind of introductory step. Then what I would recommend is, after you've kind of developed your budget ask, whether it's your kind of individual budget ask, or if you want to share one that other advocates have helped to develop. So later on this year, I know Strategies will help put out, we call them targeted actions. So you'll get an email from us where it'll say, here's, 15 line items related to early education and care that we're advocating for this year in the state budget. You can delete the ones you don't want to advocate for, keep all 15 on there, and then you can send that to your legislators specifically. So that's another way that you can kind of maintain contact with them. And then honestly, Latoya's example with Budget Bootcamp, I think is a great way to kind of keep this relationship and process going too, because then you get to go to the State House in the spring, you get to have that face-to-face meeting, talk a little bit in person about your budget priorities. So it's kind of a combination of all three, I guess I would say, that you want to use, phone, email, in person, every tool that you have available to you to maintain that relationship, to share a little bit with them about what's important to you. And even though the timeline shows that the House and the Senate don't finalize their proposals until later in the spring, in April and May, in the late winter is when all of the representatives and all of the senators meet with their respective leadership, so leadership in the House and leadership in the Senate, to share their priorities. So they say, Speaker of the House, these are the 5 things that are very important to me in this upcoming budget. You all want to make sure that they've heard from you before they have that conversation. So the earlier you can get in touch with them, the better. All right. Pop to the end real quick. I think we had one slide left and then we're done. Okay, so we have a couple resources here. A few related to just early education and care funding 101 from Massachusetts taxpayers. And then Neighborhood Villages has budget briefs as well, which are linked here. So feel free to take a look at the resources after the meeting. And if you have any questions, please reach out. We shared the next sort of save the date for our budget breakdown proposal is in February, where we will go over the governor's FY27 proposal, and we are expecting that will come out in late January. So that is all we have for you all today. I see there's a couple more comments in the chat, so I'm just going to scroll through and make sure I didn't miss any questions, but we have about 8 minutes left for Q&A or just conversation.
Also, Marissa, while you're scrolling, I'll just add that. So we have budget briefs regarding fiscal year 2026 budget, and we will be covering fiscal year 2027. So you can pop back on our website and throughout the process, we'll have briefs coming out about the different proposals.
You're
I have a
muted,
question.
Marissa.
Sorry, I don't know. Can I ask a question? I just was wondering, it seems like I'm thinking about the timeline that you were saying, and it seems like we need to have it sounds like the governor sort of like the budget's being planned for the end of January. So it seems like even a little late now to kind of get started on that 2027 budget.
I think what's important is that the governor is one step in the process, and I think that the Department of Early Education and Care and their priorities that we shared on one of those earlier slides, that helps to inform the governor's budget each year. And I think you're right, like they're actively working on it right now. So I wouldn't say it's too late. It's never too late. It is important for them to hear from you. At the same time, the legislature holds a lot of power with the state budget process. So the governor is one step in that process. It's an important step still, but the legislature also holds a lot of power. So I think we always view this as like a good exercise. It's important for the governor to hear from you all, and it's really important to start to focus on the legislature and developing those relationships in advance of the spring. Does that help
So
answer your
the
question?
legislature we have a little bit more time
Yeah.
to get, okay, I see.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly.
Perfect. Okay, thanks so much.
It's a great question, though. All right, so I'm going to put the link to the form for the governor's office in the chat right here, just so that you all can see that as well, too. And this can be a quick note, a quick email, too. You don't have to include line item numbers or talk about where it pops up in the state budget. If you want to just tell them like this is something that's really important to me, and I'd like to see you reflect that in the state budget in some way. That's okay too.
Marissa, just to Ren's question, do you want to put the timeline back up so people can see when the different proposals will come out between now and the end of July? End of June, sorry.
Yes, of course.
Yes, Rhonda, we'll send out the links to email folks too.
All right. So here is the timeline. So we're expecting the governor's budget will come out around January 28th. It's usually that last week in January. That's the very first step of the process. And then after that budget proposal comes out, the House and the Senate will hold that joint Ways and Means Committee hearing, where they will ask members from the governor's cabinet and other panelists to share about priorities for the upcoming budget. So they'll have like an education focused day in the legislature. That's sort of the next step in that process. Then in April, the House Ways and Means Committee will release their proposal. So they'll say, this is what we think, this is what the House thinks the FY27 budget should look like. Other representatives can file amendments, they can make suggestions to change it slightly, there's debate, and then by the end of the month, they'll finalize their proposal. That process sort of repeats in the Senate. So the Senate Ways and Means Committee will share what they think the FY27 budget should look like. There will be the debate and amendment process with the Senate. They'll finalize their proposal. And then a conference committee, which is made up of members from both the House and the Senate, will meet to essentially negotiate a compromise proposal that both branches agree on. And once that is finalized, it gets sent to the governor for final approval.
And I'll just throw this in. Our legislature hasn't had the budget in on time in more than a decade. So
Hey, this year was close,
this is a
though.
timeline, but you know, the final budget comes out when it does.
Yeah, that's very true.
Guys, I just have a question.
Yeah,
I
Rhonda.
know we talk about all children, right? But do you have a separate budget for special needs children? I mean, because we have so many special needs children in our school district, and they really need a lot of help. So
Yeah.
do we have a separate budget for them, or is it just included in all children's budget?
It's a good question, Rhonda. So the way you should think about it is what we just talked about today, this process, that's for funding everything in state government. So everything from roads and the MBTA and transportation to education, public school funding, early education and care funding, and everything in between. So that's what the legislature is tasked with doing over these next few months. They have to look at every single thing that the state funds, and they have to decide how to prioritize. So what we're talking about today is mostly early education and care funding. There are a couple things that fund relating to additional support for children. So there's an early childhood mental health consultation grant that might be interesting to you. The Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative includes some support for inclusion. So it allows them to hire additional staff to serve children in early education and care programs with special needs. But I think primarily what you're talking about is just funding for special education services in public schools, which yes, there is. It's called Chapter 70. It's sort of how public schools are funded in Massachusetts. And if you're interested in that, I can send you some more information on that specifically.
Thank you, because yesterday I was in a meeting and there was some questions asked, and it seems as if the parents need more help in understanding what's happening when they go to a meeting.
Mm.
So that would be very helpful. Thank
Like
you.
an IEP meeting?
Like an IEP meeting, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not
Yeah,
quite
I
sure
can
if
send
they
you a note about
understand
that.
what's really going on.
Yeah, that's a great one. Thanks for bringing it up. All right, so we are at 7:30. I just want to thank you all for jumping on a Zoom at night. I know that it's late and you probably had a long day, but we hope this was helpful and that this is a good resource for you all. We're going to plan to do it. We have 4 of these scheduled throughout the year. And yeah, just if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. And yeah, hope to see you all soon.
All right. Thanks for coming out, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.